A flight attendant becomes a pilot at 37,000 feet. The cabin pressure dropped, the pilot collapsed, and Helen Carter, a flight attendant with no training to fly a plane, suddenly became the only person who could land a Boeing 737 carrying 147 souls. In 12 minutes, she would either save everyone or crash into the mountains below. Before we dive in, what time are you listening? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. Helen Carter woke up at 4 in the morning on March 15th, just like she had done for the past 11 years. She made herself a cup of black coffee, no sugar, and stared out of her apartment window at the dark Boston skyline. At 42 years old, Helen had spent nearly half her life serving passengers on commercial flights. She tied her auburn hair into a tight bun, put on her navy blue uniform, and headed to Logan International Airport. Today was supposed to be just another Tuesday, another routine flight from Boston to Denver. She arrived at the airport by 5:30, went through security, and met her crew in the briefing room. The captain was James Mitchell, a veteran pilot with 23 years of experience and over 15,000 flight hours. The first officer was Daniel Price, younger but competent, with 6 years under his belt. Helen had flown with both of them before. They were professionals, reliable, safe. The pre-flight checks were standard. Everything looked perfect. The weather forecast showed clear skies most of the way, with only minor turbulence expected over the Midwest. Flight 629 was scheduled to depart at 7:15. Passengers began boarding at 6:45. Helen greeted each one with a practiced smile, helping them stow their luggage, answering questions about seat assignments and connecting flights. There were families with young children, business travelers typing on laptops, elderly couples holding hands, 147 people in total, all trusting that this metal tube would carry them safely across the country. Helen moved through the aisles, checking seatbelts, demonstrating the safety procedures that most passengers ignored. She had done this thousands of times. The routine was comforting, predictable. At exactly 7:15, the plane pushed back from the gate. Captain Mitchell's voice came over the intercom, calm and authoritative, welcoming everyone aboard and confirming their arrival time in Denver. The engines roared to life. The aircraft taxied down the runway, picking up speed, and then lifted smoothly into the morning sky. Boston disappeared beneath them, replaced by a blanket of clouds that glowed orange in the sunrise. Helen and the other 2 flight attendants began their service once the seatbelt sign turned off. Coffee, tea, juice, snacks, the usual requests, the usual complaints about legroom and temperature. Helen poured drinks, handed out napkins, and made small talk with passengers. An hour into the flight, they were cruising at 37,000 feet. The cabin was quiet except for the hum of the engines and the occasional cry of a baby. Helen was in the galley preparing the next round of beverages when she heard a strange sound from the cockpit. A thud, then nothing. She paused, listening. Flight attendants develop an instinct for things that are not right. She had heard thousands of sounds on thousands of flights, and this one made her stomach tighten. She walked quickly to the cockpit door and knocked twice. No response. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Her heart began to race. She used the intercom to call the cockpit. No answer. Protocol required her to wait, but something was wrong. She could feel it. She entered the access code and pushed the door open. What she saw made her blood freeze. Captain Mitchell was slumped over the controls, unconscious. First Officer Price was struggling, his face pale and covered in sweat, his hands trembling on the yoke. He looked at Helen with desperate eyes and said 3 words that changed everything. "I cannot see." Helen stood frozen for exactly 2 seconds. Then her training kicked in. She pressed the call button for medical assistance and spoke into the intercom, her voice somehow steady despite the terror clawing at her chest. "We need a doctor on board immediately. Please identify yourself and come to the front of the aircraft." She turned back to the cockpit. Daniel Price was still conscious, but barely. He was gasping for breath, his vision gone, his hands slipping off the controls. The plane began to tilt slightly to the left. Helen grabbed his shoulder. "Daniel, what happened?" He struggled to speak. "Carbon monoxide. Must be a leak." Captain went first. "I held on, but I cannot." His voice trailed off and his body went limp. Helen caught him before he fell completely, but she could not hold his weight and keep the plane steady at the same time. The yoke was moving. The aircraft was banking. Alarms started beeping. Altitude warnings. Speed warnings. The autopilot was on, but it could only do so much when the plane was being pulled off course by an unconscious pilot's weight against the controls. Helen had no choice. She grabbed the yoke with both hands and pulled. The plane leveled out, but her hands were shaking so hard she could barely maintain her grip. She had never flown anything in her life. Not a plane, not even a small aircraft. She had watched pilots work, had been in cockpits during routine operations, but watching and doing were completely different things. The instrument panel in front of her looked like a nightmare of dials, screens, buttons, and levers. She did not know what any of them meant. Behind her, she could hear passengers starting to panic. The plane's sudden movements had scared them. Another flight attendant, Maria, appeared at the cockpit door, her face white. "Helen, what is happening?" "Get them calm," Helen said, her voice tight. "Tell them we have everything under control. And find me a doctor, now." Maria disappeared. Helen stared at the controls, her mind racing. The autopilot was still engaged. That was good. That meant the plane would try to maintain its course and altitude. But the two pilots were incapacitated, possibly dying from carbon monoxide poisoning, and she had no idea how to land a Boeing 737. She needed help. She needed someone who knew what to do. She reached for the radio with one hand, keeping the other on the yoke, even though the autopilot was handling most of the work. She pressed the button she had seen pilots use countless times. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Flight 629. Both pilots are unconscious. I am a flight attendant. I have the controls, but I do not know how to fly this aircraft. I need immediate assistance." There was a brief silence that felt like an eternity. Then a voice crackled through, calm and professional. "Flight 629, this is Denver Air Traffic Control. We copy your mayday. What is your current status?" Helen looked at the altimeter. 36,800 feet. Speed indicator showed 480 knots. Heading was displayed on a compass that she barely understood. "We are at approximately 37,000 feet, she said, reading off what she could see. "Speed is 480. Autopilot is on. I have 2 unconscious pilots and 147 passengers. I do not know how to land this plane. Copy that, 629. Stay calm. We are going to get you through this. My name is Robert, and I am going to be your guide. First, do not touch anything unless I tell you to. Is the autopilot definitely engaged?" Helen looked at the panel. There was a green light next to a button labeled Autopilot. "Yes," she confirmed. "Good," Robert said. "That means the plane will fly itself for now. We have time. We are going to bring in an expert pilot to talk you through every single step. Your job right now is to stay calm and listen carefully." "Can you do that?" Helen took a deep breath. Her hands had stopped shaking. She was terrified, but she was also focused. "Yes," she said. "I can do that." Behind her, a man appeared. He was in his 50s, wearing glasses and a polo shirt. "I am a doctor," he said quickly. "Maria said you needed help." Helen pointed to the two pilots without taking her eyes off the instruments. "Carbon monoxide poisoning. Both unconscious. I need them moved, and I need you to keep them alive." The doctor immediately began assessing Captain Mitchell, checking his pulse and breathing. Helen heard him calling for oxygen masks and medical supplies. The cockpit was cramped, chaotic, but the doctor worked efficiently. Maria and another passenger helped drag the pilots out of their seats and into the cabin where there was more room to work. Now Helen was alone in the cockpit. The yoke in front of her. The throttle. The hundreds of buttons and switches. The view through the windscreen showed endless blue sky and white clouds. It was beautiful and terrifying. Robert's voice came through the radio again. "Helen, we have Captain Sarah Donovan on the line. She is a retired 737 pilot with 30 years of experience. She is going to walk you through everything. You are going to be fine." A new voice came through, a woman's voice, steady and reassuring. "Helen, my name is Sarah. I want you to know that you can do this. Thousands of pilots land planes every single day, and you have something they do not have. You have me in your ear guiding you through every single step. First, I need you to tell me exactly what you see in front of you." Helen described the instrument panel as best as she could. Sarah asked specific questions. "What does the altimeter read? What is the heading? Is the fuel gauge showing more than half?" Helen answered each one. "Good," Sarah said. Now here is what we are going to do. We have about 90 minutes of fuel left. That gives us plenty of time. Denver is your destination, and we are going to bring you straight in. But first, I need you to understand the basics. The yoke controls pitch and roll. Push forward, the nose goes down. Pull back, the nose goes up. Turn left or right, the plane banks. Do not make any sudden movements. Everything in flying is smooth and gradual. Okay, Helen said, gripping the yoke lightly. Next, Sarah continued, the throttle controls your speed. It is the lever to your right. Push it forward, you go faster. Pull it back, you slow down. But you are not going to touch it yet. Autopilot has you at the perfect speed. Helen felt slightly more confident. She could understand these basic concepts. But landing? That was something else entirely. Over the next hour, Sarah walked her through every system. How to read the altimeter, the artificial horizon, the speed indicator, how to communicate with air traffic control, how to prepare for descent. Helen listened to every word, repeated back every instruction, asked questions when she did not understand. Behind her, through the open cockpit door, she could hear the doctor working on the pilots. She heard passengers crying, praying, calling loved ones. She heard Maria trying to keep everyone calm, her voice shaking but determined. Helen could not think about them right now. She had to focus. She had to learn how to land a plane in less than an hour. Sarah's voice remained steady. Helen, we are going to start your descent soon. Denver is clearing all other air traffic. You are going to have the entire airport to yourself. Fire trucks and ambulances will be standing by, but that is just precaution. You are going to land this plane safely. Do you believe me? Helen surprised herself by answering honestly. Yes, I do. Good, Sarah said. Because I believe in you too. Now let us talk about the approach. The hardest part of flying is not the flying itself. It is the landing. But we are going to break it down into small steps. You are going to reduce speed, lower the flaps, extend the landing gear, and bring the nose down gradually. I will tell you exactly when and how to do each thing. You just have to trust me and trust yourself. Air traffic control began feeding Helen information. Heading adjustments, altitude targets. She followed every instruction, her hands surprisingly steady now. The autopilot did most of the work, but she had to make manual adjustments as they descended. At 20,000 feet, Sarah told her to disengage the autopilot. This was it. Helen was now manually flying a Boeing 737. Her heart pounded so hard she could hear it in her ears, but her hands did what Sarah told them to do. Small movements, gentle pressure. The plane responded. At 15,000 feet, she lowered the flaps. A mechanical whir filled the cockpit as the wing surfaces extended, creating more drag and lift. The plane slowed. At 10,000 feet, she extended the landing gear. 3 green lights appeared on the panel, confirming all wheels were down and locked. At 5,000 feet, Denver International Airport came into view. Helen could see the runways, the terminal, the tiny vehicles moving below. It looked impossibly small, impossibly far away. You are doing beautifully, Sarah said. Now I need you to line up with runway 34 left. You see it? The long strip of concrete straight ahead? Helen saw it. Yes, perfect. Keep your nose pointed right at it. You are going to descend at 700 feet per minute. Watch your altitude and your speed. I need you at 140 knots by the time you cross the threshold. Helen's hands moved almost automatically now. She had been listening to Sarah for so long that the instructions felt natural. She adjusted the throttle, feeling the plane slow. She pulled back slightly on the yoke, managing the descent rate. At 1,000 feet, she could see the runway clearly. At 500 feet, she could see the markings on the pavement. At 200 feet, Sarah said, start your flare. Pull back gently on the yoke. Raise the nose just a little. You want to float onto the runway, not drop onto it. Helen pulled back. The nose lifted. The ground rushed up to meet them. At 50 feet, she held the yoke steady. At 20 feet, Sarah said, keep pulling back. Nice and smooth. The wheels touched down. Not perfectly smooth, but solid. The plane bounced slightly, then settled onto the runway. Helen immediately pushed forward on the throttle reversers like Sarah had instructed, and the plane began to slow. She pressed the brakes gently, feeling the massive aircraft decelerate. They were down. They were safe. The cockpit erupted with noise. Air traffic control congratulating her. Emergency vehicles racing alongside the plane. Behind her, passengers were cheering, crying, screaming with relief. Helen brought the plane to a complete stop on the taxiway. She sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the yoke, unable to believe what had just happened. Sarah's voice came through one more time. "Helen, you just saved 147 lives. You are a hero." Helen could not speak. Tears streamed down her face. Emergency crews boarded the plane within minutes. Paramedics rushed to Captain Mitchell and First Officer Price, both still unconscious but alive. Passengers were evacuated quickly and efficiently. Helen was the last one off the plane. Her legs could barely support her weight. Outside news cameras were already gathering. Investigators would later determine that a faulty seal in the cockpit ventilation system had leaked carbon monoxide into the flight deck. Both pilots had been poisoned gradually during the flight. If Helen had not acted when she did, everyone on board would have died. Captain Mitchell and First Officer Price both recovered fully after treatment. Helen Carter became a sensation overnight. News outlets called her the miracle flight attendant. She was invited to talk shows, given awards, celebrated as a hero. But Helen always insisted she was not special. She had simply done what needed to be done. She had listened. She had trusted. She had not given up. 6 months later, Helen enrolled in flight school. If she could land a 737 with no training, she figured she could learn to do it properly. 2 years later, she earned her commercial pilot license. Today, Captain Helen Carter flies for the same airline, often on the same Boston to Denver route. And every single time she takes off, she remembers that March morning when everything went wrong and somehow, impossibly, went right. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos like this.